The blazing sun of New York City bore down relentlessly on Fifth Avenue. Perched on the pavement, Ethan, a 28-year-old man with unruly hair and worn-out clothes, sat silently. His sapphire eyes, once full of life, now appeared clouded with exhaustion and starvation. The prominent outline of his ribs under his tattered shirt revealed weeks of enduring hunger and limited nourishment. Ethan observed the chaotic rush of the pedestrians, feeling utterly invisible amidst the throng. A painful growl from his stomach served as a sharp reminder. He hadn't eaten in over 2 days. "Just one more day, Ethan. Hang in there. Someone is bound to notice you today," he whispered under his breath, clinging to a fragile thread of hope. But deep inside, a bitter voice retorted, "Who am I fooling? Nobody gives a second glance to a beggar." The hours crawled by with an agonizing slowness as Ethan wrestled against the urge to scour the nearby trash bins for scraps. He had promised himself not to fall that low, but hunger was a merciless foe. His gaze involuntarily followed every passerby clutching a bag of food or sipping from steaming cups of coffee. The tantalizing scent of hot dogs being prepared at a nearby stand mocked his senses, leaving his mouth parched and his stomach in rebellious agony. "Maybe I should try that shelter again," he thought fleetingly, only to shudder at the memory of his last visit. "No, I can't," he murmured, unwilling to complete the unsettling thought. His mind drifted to the circumstances that had brought him here. Why did it have to be like this? I wish things were different. I wish I had a family, a place to call home. He lamented silently, his memories weighing heavily on his spirit. As the afternoon stretched on, despair took deeper root in Ethan. He observed other homeless individuals approaching strangers, pleading for spare change. Yet he lacked the courage to do the same. His pride, the sole remnant of his former self, refused to let him. Nearby, an elderly man sat with a weathered face that spoke of years of hardship. He looked at Ethan with a mix of pity and understanding. "Kid, sometimes life feels like it's at a dead end, but somehow we keep going," the man rasped, his voice thick from years on the street. "I know," Ethan replied, his voice trembling, a mix of hope and disbelief. "But it feels like we're trapped, like nothing will ever get better. We scrape by with a few coins from kind strangers, but what we need is more than that. Real opportunities, real homes, and real food on the table." As if the universe had finally heard his silent plea, a middle-aged woman approached Ethan. Without a word, she extended a paper bag. Inside, a still-warm sandwich emitted an aroma of fresh bread and savory meat, making his stomach clench in anticipation. Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. You have no idea what this means to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The woman smiled softly before walking away, leaving Ethan astounded by her kindness. For the first time in days, a faint spark of hope flickered within him. Maybe kindness still existed in this harsh world. Maybe he wasn't entirely alone. As Ethan prepared to savor the precious gift, he noticed 2 other men sitting nearby. Their gaunt faces and hollow eyes reflected his own struggles. Without hesitation, Ethan broke the sandwich into 3 pieces and extended them to the others. "Here, let's share this. Nobody should have to go hungry when we can help each other," he said, his voice hoarse but kind. Across the street, 2 women observed the scene. Olivia, a young woman with flowing brown hair and empathetic green eyes, felt her heart ache at the sight of Ethan's selflessness. She stepped forward, ready to act, when a sharp tug on her arm stopped her. Victoria, her stepmother, a stern woman with piercing grey eyes and an unyielding demeanor, held her back. "Don't even think about it, Olivia. I won't let you mingle with those kinds of people," Victoria hissed, her voice sharp with disdain. "But Victoria, they need help. How can we just turn our backs on them?" Olivia countered, her voice wavering with a mix of conviction and sorrow. Victoria's high heels clicked against the pavement as she dragged Olivia toward a luxurious storefront. The stark contrast between the opulent window displays and the grim reality across the street couldn't have been more striking. Olivia resisted, her gaze lingering on Ethan and his companions. Victoria abruptly turned to face her stepdaughter, her face a mask of fury and revulsion. "Have you lost your senses, Olivia? These people are dangerous. Any money you give them will go straight to drugs or alcohol," she hissed, her words dripping with condescension. "You don't know that, Victoria. That man just shared the only meal he probably had today. How can you be so heartless?" Olivia retorted, her voice trembling with emotion. Their heated exchange drew the attention of passers-by. Usually reserved, Olivia found a newfound courage bubbling within her. She wrenched her arm free and took a determined step back toward the street. "They're human beings, Victoria. They deserve compassion, not judgment," Olivia declared, her voice firm. Victoria's nails dug into Olivia's arm as she yanked her back once more. "You don't understand the world, dear. These people chose this life. It's not our duty to save them," Victoria sneered. "Chose? No one chooses to go hungry or live on the streets. How can you be so blind?" Olivia countered, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. Summoning every ounce of resolve, Olivia broke free and rushed toward Ethan and his companions. With trembling hands, she pulled out several bills from her purse and offered them, her voice shaking as she spoke. "This, I hope, can help in some way," Olivia said softly, extending the money toward Ethan. The young man looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude, the unexpected gesture leaving him momentarily speechless. Their gazes locked for a fleeting moment, a silent understanding passing between them. "Thank you, miss. Your kindness means more than you could ever know," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion, as if each word carried the weight of his struggles. "It's nothing, really," Olivia murmured, her tone a mix of relief and frustration at her own limitations. "I only wish I could do more." Victoria observed the interaction from a distance, her expression an unsettling mix of anger and calculation. Her sharp grey eyes lingered on Ethan, narrowing as an idea began to crystallize in her mind, a scheme that could address her growing frustration with Olivia and serve her own interests at the same time. Her lips curled into a cold, thin smile, betraying the formation of a sinister plan. As Olivia returned to the sidewalk, she braced herself for the inevitable onslaught of reprimands from her stepmother. To her surprise, Victoria didn't lash out immediately. Instead, she greeted Olivia with a smirk dripping with condescension. "Well, since you seem so determined to mingle with those people, perhaps it's time you learned a proper lesson about their kind," Victoria remarked, her voice thick with sarcasm. "What are you planning, Victoria?" Olivia asked, her heart sinking as unease crept into her thoughts. The uncharacteristic calm in her stepmother's demeanor unsettled her more than any angry outburst could. Victoria's sharp gaze flicked back toward Ethan as she and Olivia walked away. Her mind worked feverishly, her expression betraying a newfound determination. Olivia, lost in her own thoughts about Ethan and the brief connection they shared, failed to notice the predatory gleam in Victoria's eyes. There was something about him, a quiet dignity and kindness that stood in stark contrast to his dire circumstances. It lingered in her mind like a faint melody, stirring a mix of admiration and sorrow. "That young man," Victoria began, her tone casual but carrying an undercurrent of intrigue that sent a chill down Olivia's spine. "There's something peculiar about him, don't you think?" "Why the sudden interest, Victoria?" Olivia asked, her suspicion rising. "A moment ago, you wanted me to pretend he didn't exist." By the time they arrived at the mansion, Olivia's confusion had only deepened. Victoria stormed through the door, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Olivia trailed behind her in silence, her unease growing. The grand entry hall echoed with Victoria's commanding presence, and within moments Robert appeared from his office, his forehead creased with concern. "Victoria, what's going on?" Robert asked, glancing between the two women, his voice heavy with apprehension. Without missing a beat, Victoria launched into a tirade. "Your daughter," she began, her tone brimming with indignation, "was fraternizing with beggars today." "Beggars?" Her voice rang through the hall like the crack of a whip, each word laden with scorn. Robert's brow furrowed as he turned to Olivia. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice tired but tinged with disappointment. "Father, I was only trying to help someone in need," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "I don't see how that could be wrong." Victoria seized Robert's arm and dragged him into his office, slamming the door behind them. Olivia stood frozen in the hall, the muffled sounds of their heated argument filtering through the thick wooden door. Inside, Victoria's voice rose with fury. "Don't you see the danger here, Robert? She's tarnishing our reputation by associating with the filth of society," Victoria hissed, gesturing wildly as her eyes burned with frustration. Robert sank into his chair, running a weary hand over his face. "Victoria, she has a good heart." "We can't punish her for that," he said, though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. "A good heart?" Victoria snapped. "In this world, a good heart is a liability we can't afford." Her voice cut through the room like a blade. She began pacing, listing Olivia's missteps in rapid succession, her unsanctioned donations to charities, her volunteer work in impoverished neighborhoods, and her refusal to attend elite social events. She's ruining everything we've worked for, Robert. Our social standing, our connections, everything is at risk because of this obsession she has with helping the undeserving. Victoria's words dripped with venom. She's my daughter, Victoria. I can't just strip her of who she is, Robert argued weakly. Though his resolve was faltering under the weight of her relentless accusations, Victoria abruptly stopped pacing, turning to face Robert with an unnervingly calm demeanor. Her eyes gleamed with a sinister light. "I have a plan," she declared, her voice low and steady, each word carrying an ominous weight. Robert straightened in his chair, his nerves fraying at the edges. "What kind of plan?" he asked cautiously, dreading the answer. "A plan that will solve two problems at once," Victoria replied, her cold smile widening. Silence blanketed the room as Robert stared at her, fear creeping into his expression. He knew that look in her eyes all too well. It heralded trouble. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial tone. "That beggar Olivia was so eager to help," she began, her words deliberate and slow. "What if we used him to teach her a lesson? To show her the truth about people like him? What if she had to live with him, to see firsthand just how unworthy they are?" Robert's face turned ashen as the realization of her scheme dawned on him. "Victoria, you can't possibly mean—" "Marriage," she interrupted, her voice sharp and decisive. "We'll force Olivia to marry that beggar." Robert recoiled, his hand trembling as he set his drink down. "You've lost your mind, Victoria. That's monstrous," he stammered, rising from his chair. "Monstrous?" Victoria repeated, her tone icy. "No, Robert, it's necessary. Think about it. What better way to teach her the harsh realities of the world than to make her live them?" The room fell into a heavy silence, Victoria's cruel smile the only movement as Robert stood frozen, unable to find the words to oppose her. The plan was as terrifying as it was cunning, and he knew that once Victoria set her mind to something, resistance would be futile. Robert began pacing the office, his movements restless as he ran his hands through his graying hair. His frustration and anxiety were evident in every step. "But what about her happiness, Victoria? My daughter deserves better than this. How can we force her into something so cruel?" he argued, his voice steady despite the tremor of unease behind it. Victoria turned to face him, her expression hard as stone, her tone sharp and unyielding. "Happiness, Robert? We're not talking about happiness, we're talking about her future. Do you have any idea what people would say if she keeps on this path? The whispers, the looks at social gatherings. Olivia needs to learn the repercussions of her reckless actions," she declared, her words heavy with conviction. Robert shook his head, trying to maintain his composure. "This doesn't feel right. Olivia wouldn't be ashamed of someone like him. She has a good heart. She wouldn't care about social status or appearances, don't you think?" His voice carried a flicker of pride as he thought of his daughter's integrity. Victoria let out a cold, humorless laugh that reverberated through the room. "Oh, Robert, do you honestly believe she could handle it? She may have a kind heart, but she's still a girl raised in privilege. A few days with that beggar, and she'll come running back to her senses," she said dismissively, waving off his concerns with a flick of her hand. Robert leaned against his desk, the weight of her proposal evident in his hunched posture. He sighed deeply before speaking again. "And what about him? How do you plan to convince that young man to go along with something so absurd?" His tone was skeptical, his mind struggling to comprehend the depths of Victoria's plan. "Money, dear," Victoria said simply, her confidence unwavering. "We'll offer him a sum he can't refuse. For someone in his situation, it'll be an offer too tempting to turn down." Her voice was smooth, calculated, and brimming with certainty. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog. Robert stared blankly into the space between them, his mind a storm of conflicted emotions. The love he felt for his daughter clashed with the social pressures Victoria described. I don't know, Victoria. This feels like it's too much. Can't we just sit down and talk to her?" he murmured, his voice lined with doubt. Victoria stepped closer, softening her tone just enough to sound persuasive. "Robert, sometimes words aren't enough. Olivia needs to learn this lesson for herself." You know as well as I do that we have to be firm to protect the ones we love, she reasoned, her voice an unsettling mix of compassion and manipulation. Robert rubbed his temples, torn between his paternal instincts and the relentless force of Victoria's arguments. But forcing a marriage, playing with her life like this, there has to be another way, he protested weakly, his voice faltering as he spoke. Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation. Your hesitation is exactly why Olivia is running wild. You're her father, Robert. It's your duty to ensure she protects her reputation and ours, she retorted sharply, crossing her arms as if to punctuate her point. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in hues of orange and pink. Meanwhile, Ethan sat on a worn bench in a nearby park, watching people hurry by. The cool air was a small reprieve from the relentless day, though the ache of hunger remained. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of elegant footsteps approaching. Victoria, dressed impeccably in her designer coat and high heels, stood before him, a stark contrast to her surroundings. Her cold gaze swept over him, her presence as imposing as her attire. "You're the man from earlier, aren't you? The one sitting outside the cafe?" she asked, her voice a blend of disdain and faux politeness. Ethan rose to his feet, instinctively wary. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Ethan." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse but steady. Victoria's lips curled into a calculating smile. "I have a proposal for you, one that could completely change your life," she declared, her tone smooth and enticing. Without hesitation, Victoria laid out her plan, detailing the arranged marriage with Olivia. She painted a picture of luxury and stability, promising Ethan a life free from hunger and hardship if he agreed. As her words sank in, Ethan's eyes widened with disbelief. "You're asking me to marry your stepdaughter, the woman who showed me kindness today, for money?" he asked, incredulous at the audacity of the proposal. Victoria nodded, her smile unwavering. "Precisely. Think about it, Ethan. You'd never have to worry about food or shelter again. You'd have everything you've ever dreamed of," she purred, her words dripping with temptation. Ethan shook his head, his resolve unbroken. "I can't do it. I can't use someone like that, especially someone who treated me with kindness," he said firmly, his voice filled with quiet strength. Victoria's expression flickered with irritation, but she quickly masked it. Changing tactics, she leaned in slightly, her voice lowering to a persuasive murmur. "Think of what you could do with the money, Ethan. You could help so many people. Your friends on the streets, those who go to bed hungry every night. Isn't that what Olivia would want? To use her resources to help others?" she pressed, sensing his hesitation. Ethan hesitated, his fists clenching as he considered her words. Images of his companions on the streets, their gaunt faces and desperate eyes flashed in his mind. I could really make a difference," he murmured, more to himself than to Victoria. "Yes, Ethan," she said, her voice silkier than ever. "Imagine the lives you could change. Isn't that what Olivia would do in your position?" As Ethan grappled with the weight of the decision, his eyes caught something glinting on Victoria's coat. A gold brooch, intricately designed with a rose and vines, caught his attention. Something about it stirred a memory deep within him, a fragment of a time he thought he had long forgotten. His hand reached out involuntarily, almost brushing against the brooch. This brooch," Ethan stammered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen it before." Victoria stepped back slightly, startled by his reaction. "It's just an old family heirloom, nothing of importance," she said quickly, her hand moving to cover it protectively. But the flicker of unease in her eyes betrayed her, hinting that this brooch might hold secrets far deeper than she was willing to admit. Brooch. That brooch. Ethan couldn't shake the strange sensation of familiarity it evoked. It tugged at the recesses of his memory, drawing forth faint fragments of a melody and the soft image of a woman singing to him as a child. "How do I know this?" he thought, struggling to grasp the fleeting recollection. Before he could dwell further, Victoria's sharp voice snapped him back to reality. "Shall we go? I'm sure you'll do the right thing," Victoria urged, gesturing for Ethan to follow her. Hesitant but seeing no alternative, Ethan nodded. He turned to his companions, the other homeless men and women who had been his makeshift family on the streets. His voice trembled as he spoke, the weight of unspoken promises heavy in the air. "Don't worry, I'll come back for you. I'll find a way to help all of you," he said, emotion choking his words. As he climbed into the sleek car, The scent of new leather enveloped him, starkly contrasting the grit of the streets. Ethan sat in silence, his mind racing with doubts. The surreal nature of Victoria's proposal gnawed at him, as did the strange pull of her brooch. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," he murmured, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. "But if this can help others, maybe it's worth it." The car glided silently through the gates of the mansion, its grandeur leaving Ethan speechless. The sprawling estate, with its immaculate gardens and towering architecture, felt worlds away from the life he knew. Ethan stepped out of the car, his ragged clothes and hesitant demeanor at odds with the opulence around him. Olivia, perched by her bedroom window with a book in hand, heard the low hum of the approaching vehicle. Curious, she set the book aside and peeked through the curtains. Her eyes widened in disbelief when she saw Ethan emerging from the car, looking every bit as out of place as she felt in her own home. "What's going on? Why did Victoria bring him here?" she murmured, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and confusion. The foreboding feeling that had been haunting her all afternoon intensified, sending a shiver down her spine. Victoria ushered Ethan into the grand entry hall, its marble floors gleaming under the chandelier's glow. Casting a meaningful glance up at Olivia's window, she smirked to herself. "Wait here," she instructed Ethan curtly before ascending the grand staircase. Her heels clicked with determination as she approached Olivia's room. Knocking once but not waiting for an answer, Victoria swept into the room. "Olivia, dear, we need to talk," she announced, her tone artificially sweet. Olivia turned to face her stepmother, her expression a mixture of confusion and dread. "Victoria, what's going on? Why is he here?" she asked, her voice shaky. Victoria's smile didn't falter. "All in good time, my dear. First, sit down. We have much to discuss," she replied, gesturing to the edge of the bed. Reluctantly, Olivia obeyed, her eyes fixed on Victoria with growing suspicion. Victoria began pacing the room, her movements deliberate as her sharp heels punctuated the silence. "Olivia," she began, her voice adopting a veneer of concern, "your fixation with helping the less fortunate has been troubling. Your father and I have come to a decision. It's time you learned a hard but necessary lesson about the realities of life." A cold knot tightened in Olivia's stomach. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice faltering. Victoria turned, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Consequences, dear, and a marriage." Olivia shot to her feet, her hands trembling. "Marriage? What marriage?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You're going to marry the beggar downstairs," Victoria declared, savoring every word. "Ethan, the man you were so eager to help." Olivia stared at her, stunned. The blood drained from her face as her stepmother's words sank in. "This is insane. You can't be serious," she shouted, her voice echoing through the room. Victoria stopped pacing and stepped closer. "Oh, but I am, my dear. Very serious. And before you start refusing, let me explain the consequences of your disobedience," she said, her tone dropping into a menacing whisper. Olivia staggered back, collapsing onto the bed. Her mind raced, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. "All I did was help a man in need. What could I have done to deserve this? You can't force me into this. It's illegal. It's immoral," she cried, her eyes brimming with tears. Victoria crouched down, bringing her face level with Olivia's. "Oh, but I can, darling. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to see your new friend face some very serious charges. It would be such a shame if the police found something incriminating in his possession," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "You wouldn't. He's innocent. He has nothing to do with this," Olivia stammered, panic gripping her heart. Victoria straightened, her cold smile never wavering. "What I gain, dear Olivia, is a daughter-in-law who knows her place, and you'll learn that not everyone you try to help is worthy of your compassion." Cornered, Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks. "And what happens to Ethan if I agree?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria's smile turned almost maternal, though the chill in her tone remained. "He will live comfortably, far from the streets, and you, my dear, will finally learn the realities of life." Meanwhile, Ethan was led to an opulent guest room, complete with a private marble bathroom. His eyes widened as he took in the luxurious surroundings, the bathtub, the neatly folded towels, and the gleaming toiletries. The butler gestured toward the amenities. "Everything you need is here," he said before departing. Alone, Ethan turned on the faucet, watching as hot water filled the tub. He hesitated before removing his tattered clothes, his hands trembling. "How long has it been since I had a real bath?" he murmured. Stepping into the steaming water, he felt years of grime and exhaustion begin to melt away. As he scrubbed vigorously, he whispered to himself, "What have I gotten myself into? And why can't I shake the feeling I've seen that brooch before?" The soft touch of the sponge against Ethan's skin felt almost surreal. With the scented soap lathering his hair and face, he submerged himself beneath the warm water, scrubbing away years of grime. Each rinse darkened the bathwater, a silent testament to his life on the streets. Ethan lingered in the tub, savoring the warmth until it finally cooled. "It's like being reborn," he whispered, running his fingers over his now clean skin. The simple act of bathing made him feel human again, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Wrapping himself in the plush towel, Ethan turned to face his reflection in the foggy mirror. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable. His beard, wild and unkempt, concealed most of his face. Tentatively, he picked up the razor and shaving cream. His hands trembled as he began the slow, deliberate process of removing the overgrowth. Each stroke of the blade peeled back layers of his past, revealing a face he had forgotten. When he finished, he leaned closer to the mirror, his smooth cheeks unfamiliar to his touch. "Is this really me?" he murmured, the words catching in his throat. The man in the mirror looked like a stranger, yet also like a ghost from a past life. Dressing in the neatly pressed clothes left for him, Ethan felt out of place. The soft fabric of the tailored shirt brushed against his skin, so different from the coarse, tattered garments he had grown accustomed to. Adjusting the stiff collar, he took one last glance at himself in the mirror. "You can do this," he whispered to his reflection. "With a life like this, maybe I can help others." But deep down, unease still gnawed at him, a sense that he was stepping into a role that didn't truly belong to him. Descending the grand staircase, Ethan felt the weight of countless eyes on him. The opulent chandelier overhead cast a golden glow, and the murmurs of onlookers filled the air. At the bottom of the stairs, Olivia stood frozen, her breath catching as their eyes met. "Ethan, I almost didn't recognize you," she whispered, her voice laced with surprise and something he couldn't quite place. Admiration, curiosity, pity. Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Ah, excellent," she remarked, her tone syrupy yet sharp. "You cleaned up well, at least." Her piercing gaze seemed to assess him, as though he were a painting she hadn't yet decided was worthy of display. Ethan nodded, unsure of how to respond. As they moved toward the dining room, he felt Olivia's eyes linger on him. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. "Why does she look at me like that?" he thought. The vulnerability of her gaze making him feel more exposed than all his years on the streets. The days passed in a whirlwind of preparations, each more elaborate than the last. Ethan, still reeling from his transformation, struggled to navigate the strange world he had been thrust into. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in a plush chair at an exclusive beauty salon, her reflection staring back at her. The stylist worked meticulously on her intricate bridal hairstyle, but Olivia's thoughts were far away. Her hands rested lightly on the delicate fabric of her wedding dress as she replayed the events of the past days. She thought of Ethan, the hesitant conversations, the shy smiles and the glimmers of gratitude in his eyes. "He must feel just as lost as I do," she murmured under her breath, her heart tightening with sympathy. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she considered the possibility that this marriage might offer Ethan a chance to rebuild his life, and perhaps together they could find purpose in this forced union. The stylist, noticing Olivia's thoughtful expression, attempted to lighten the mood. "Are you excited for the big day, miss?" she asked with a gentle smile. Olivia hesitated before replying. "It's complicated," she said softly, "but I'm determined to make the best of it." Her gaze shifted to her reflection in the mirror, her green eyes glimmering with quiet resolve. She couldn't shake the feeling that this marriage, while far from ideal, could be a turning point, not just for Ethan but for herself as well. As the stylist finished, Olivia's mind wandered to the whispers she had overheard earlier from two staff members. Their hushed tones and furtive glances hadn't escaped her notice. "That's Victoria's stepdaughter," one had murmured. "Remember the scandal involving her stepmother?" The other had nodded, leaning closer. "How could I forget? They say she was involved in something terrible. Of course, nothing was ever proven." Their conversation had been cut short when they noticed Olivia's gaze in the mirror, their guilty expressions confirming they had said too much. Olivia's heart raced at their words. Something terrible? What could Victoria have been involved in, she wondered, the puzzle pieces of her stepmother's guarded past clicking into place in her mind. She acts like she hates me, and yet she claims to love this family. What is she hiding? Standing by the salon window, Olivia's reflection caught her attention. It wasn't just a bride staring back, it was a woman with a newfound purpose. "I'll find out the truth," she vowed silently. "If Victoria's hiding something, I'll uncover it." Hours later, the church loomed in the distance, its facade bathed in the golden glow of the afternoon sun. A procession of luxury cars began to line the cobblestone street, each delivering guests dressed in their finest attire. Inside, Ethan sat alone in a quiet corner of the church, his newly polished shoes tapping nervously against the marble floor. The weight of his suit felt suffocating, his thoughts spiraling as he anticipated the ceremony. In a nearby room, Olivia stood before a full-length mirror, the white dress cascading around her like a waterfall of silk. Her fingers traced the delicate lace detailing as she steadied herself. "This is it," she whispered. Despite her resolve, her heart pounded, as though it were trying to escape her chest. Would this union be the disaster her stepmother intended? Or could it become something entirely unexpected? Only time would tell. Utter surprise, the doors at the back of the church swung open with a loud creak. Gasps rippled through the gathered guests, their curious eyes snapping toward the source of the interruption. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon light, was the elderly man who had spoken to Ethan moments before. His ornate cane tapped rhythmically against the marble floor as he walked down the aisle with a deliberate pace, his face stern and resolute. The guests murmured in confusion, their whispers rising to a crescendo. Who was this man, and why had he disrupted such an important moment? Victoria's expression of satisfaction twisted into a mask of alarm, her grey eyes narrowing as recognition dawned on her. She leaned forward in her seat, her knuckles whitening as she clutched her designer purse. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The truth the old man had revealed was like a storm raging inside him, and now it seemed the time for that truth to come to light had arrived. He glanced at Olivia, who stood beside him, her face pale but steady. Her emerald eyes flicked between the elderly man and Ethan, silently asking the question she dared not voice. The man reached the altar, his voice trembling but clear as he addressed the congregation. "Reverend, forgive my interruption, but this ceremony cannot proceed," he announced, his tone commanding and filled with urgency. The room erupted into chaos. Guests whispered furiously, some even rising from their seats. Victoria shot up, her voice sharp and shrill. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you to interfere with this wedding?" she demanded, her mask of composure cracking under the pressure. The elderly man turned to her, his gaze piercing and unyielding. "You know exactly who I am, Victoria," he replied, his voice dripping with accusation. "And it's time everyone here knows the truth." Ethan took a step forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sir, please, tell them what you told me," he urged, glancing at Olivia. "She deserves to know." The old man nodded solemnly and turned to the crowd, his voice rising to carry over their murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Henry Caldwell. Many of you may not recognize me, but years ago I was the business partner of Olivia's late mother. Together we built an empire that Victoria has been systematically dismantling for her own gain." A collective gasp swept through the church. Olivia's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. Henry continued, his gaze softening as it fell on Olivia. "Your mother was a brilliant and compassionate woman, Olivia. She left behind not just a fortune, but a legacy of generosity and integrity. Victoria married your father not out of love, but as part of a calculated plan to take control of that legacy. And Ethan," he added, turning to the groom, "is more connected to this story than even he realizes." Ethan felt the weight of the room's attention shift to him, his throat tightening. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry gestured toward Ethan, his voice trembling with emotion. "Ethan, you're not just some man Victoria plucked off the streets. You're the son of your mother's most trusted confidant, someone who was framed and betrayed by Victoria to secure her control over this family. Your father was my closest friend, and I've spent years searching for you." The revelation struck Ethan like a thunderbolt. His knees threatened to buckle as he struggled to process the words. "My father," he stammered, his voice raw with disbelief. "Yes," Henry confirmed, stepping closer. "Your father was a kind and loyal man, but he got too close to uncovering Victoria's schemes. She ruined him, just as she's trying to ruin Olivia now. But you survived, Ethan, and now together we can make things right." The church fell into stunned silence. Olivia turned to Victoria, her face a mixture of horror and anger. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Did you manipulate all of this?" Victoria's mask of control shattered completely, her features twisted with rage and desperation as she glared at Henry and Ethan. "You're nothing but a relic, Henry, a bitter old man clinging to the past," she spat, her voice venomous. "And you," she hissed, turning to Olivia, "you're too naive to understand the world. Everything I've done has been for this family, to protect what's ours." Olivia stepped forward, her voice firm, despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "Protect? You've lied, schemed, and destroyed lives for your own selfish gain. You've done nothing but tarnish this family's name." The guests murmured in agreement, their gazes shifting from judgment of Ethan to disdain for Victoria. Sensing the tide turning against her, Victoria made a final desperate attempt to regain control. "Enough of this nonsense," she shouted. "Reverend, continue with the ceremony." But the Reverend shook his head, his expression grave. "I cannot proceed under these circumstances," he declared. Ethan took Olivia's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Olivia, I may not have much, but I promise you I will stand by your side. We can face this together." Olivia looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and strength behind them. "We will," she said softly, her voice filled with determination. Turning to the congregation, she declared, "This wedding is over, but this is just the beginning of uncovering the truth." As the guests began to disperse, Victoria stood frozen, her empire of lies crumbling around her. Henry placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've taken the first step, young man. Now let's finish what your father started." With Olivia and Henry by his side, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The secrets of the past had been unearthed, and the path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years he felt he wasn't walking it alone. "To bury the truth of what you did to me," Ethan declared, his voice resolute and ringing with clarity. The air in the church was thick with tension as every pair of eyes fixed on him. The weight of his words bore down on the congregation like a thunderclap, leaving everyone frozen in stunned silence. Victoria stood motionless at the center of the aisle, her face pale and devoid of its usual steely confidence. For the first time, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were visible. Her lips trembled, but no words came. The whispers among the guests grew louder, their judgmental stares now directed at her instead of Ethan or Olivia. "You're lying," Victoria finally hissed, her voice trembling. "This is preposterous. A tale spun from desperation to humiliate me." She gestured wildly at the crowd, attempting to regain control. "Do you hear this? This beggar dares to tarnish my name with these ridiculous accusations." But Ethan did not waver, his piercing blue eyes locked on hers, unrelenting. "You can deny it all you want, but the truth is already out, Victoria," he replied. "The evidence lies not just in my story, but in the scars you've left on everyone you've touched. Ask yourself why Henry Caldwell recognized me. Ask yourself why you've spent years despising the very people you once cast me among. Your guilt has betrayed you more than I ever could." Victoria staggered back, her composure slipping further with every word. She glanced at the crowd, now filled with faces etched with shock and disapproval. Even Robert, her husband, stood near the back of the church, his expression one of disbelief and horror. "Victoria," Robert began, his voice heavy with anguish. "Is it true? Did you really—" His words trailed off, as though he couldn't bring himself to finish the question. Her sharp gaze snapped to him, desperation flickering in her eyes. "Robert, don't listen to him. He's just a manipulative drifter. He's trying to turn you against me," she cried, her voice shrill with panic. But Robert shook his head, his hands trembling at his sides. "I want to hear the truth. I need to know what you've done," he demanded, his tone firm despite the betrayal etched into his features. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm yet commanding. "You want proof, Victoria? How about the brooch you wear so proudly?" He pointed to the ornate gold pin gleaming on her chest. "That brooch was a gift from my father. He gave it to you when you married him, and it's the only thing I could remember from my childhood after you abandoned me. It's the same brooch I clung to the day you left me on the streets." The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Some began to nod, piecing together the fragments of the story. Olivia, standing beside Ethan, took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "Victoria," Olivia said, her green eyes blazing with fury and heartbreak, "you've lied to all of us. You've manipulated, schemed and ruined lives, all to protect your status. But your obsession with power and control ends today." The congregation erupted into gasps and whispers. Victoria turned to Olivia, her composure crumbling entirely. "Olivia, you ungrateful child. After everything I've done for you, you would side with him," she shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. Olivia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You've done nothing but poison this family, Victoria. You've tried to crush my compassion, my desire to help others, all because you couldn't face your own guilt. But I see you now for who you really are, and I refuse to let you hurt anyone else." At that moment, Henry Caldwell stood up from his seat near the back of the church. He raised a hand commanding attention. "Everything Ethan has said is true," he proclaimed. "I witnessed firsthand the destruction Victoria wrought upon Jonathan Howard's legacy, and I swear I will stand with him to ensure the truth is fully uncovered." The weight of Henry's testimony silenced the room. Victoria's shoulders slumped and her defiance faded into resignation. For the first time she appeared small and defeated, her carefully constructed empire of lies collapsing around her. Ethan turned to Olivia, his voice softening. "Olivia, I never wanted any of this to happen this way, but your kindness gave me the strength to face my past and uncover the truth. I owe everything to you." Olivia reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it tightly. "And I'll stand with you, Ethan. Together, we'll rebuild what she destroyed." The Reverend, who had remained silent throughout the revelations, stepped forward, his expression solemn. "It seems this wedding has uncovered far more than expected," he said. "Shall we call this union off? Or—" Ethan glanced at Olivia, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. She smiled faintly, nodding. "No," she replied, her voice clear and confident. "This wedding will proceed, not as a sham orchestrated by Victoria, but as a declaration of hope, love, and truth." The guests erupted into applause, their murmurs of disapproval replaced with admiration. As the ceremony continued, Victoria slipped out of the church unnoticed, her exit as quiet as her downfall was loud. For Ethan and Olivia, the altar became a symbol not of societal expectation, but of resilience and newfound purpose. Together, they vowed to face the future, armed with the truth and the strength they had found in each other. Commitment of Ethan and Olivia sparked a ripple effect that no one could have foreseen. Other affluent families, once obsessed with maintaining their social standing, began reassessing their values. Inspired by the couple's dedication, they redirected their wealth toward meaningful causes, creating a wave of change that began to transform the city from its core. The Howard Harrison Foundation grew rapidly, becoming a symbol of hope for those in need. With each passing year, its initiatives expanded. Shelters for the homeless evolved into thriving community hubs, offering mental health services, educational workshops, and career counseling. Ethan's dream of breaking the cycle of poverty wasn't just a vision anymore, it was a tangible reality. One of their most successful programs, the Second Chance Initiative, focused on helping people transition out of homelessness. It provided comprehensive support, from temporary housing to skill training, helping countless individuals rebuild their lives. Ethan often visited the shelters personally, connecting with people who reminded him of his own journey. "You're not alone," he would tell them, his words resonating with the weight of someone who had lived their struggles. Olivia spearheaded programs for children. Under her guidance, the foundation opened the Horizon Homes, a network of foster care facilities where abandoned kids could thrive in a nurturing environment. These homes prioritized education, emotional support, and matching children with loving, permanent families. Olivia's belief that every child deserves a chance to dream became the cornerstone of the Foundation's mission. The couple's relentless work didn't go unnoticed. Media outlets began covering their story extensively, labeling them as the heart of the city. Documentaries, interviews, and articles shared Ethan's journey from the streets to becoming a beacon of hope. His authenticity and humility won the hearts of many, making him an emblem of redemption and the power of compassion. Even Robert, deeply regretful of his role in enabling Victoria's schemes, threw himself into the foundation's work. His business acumen proved invaluable, and he often served as a liaison between the foundation and other wealthy benefactors. In time, Robert found solace in his efforts, his actions becoming a way to atone for his past. He often remarked, "Victoria may have tried to break this family, but it's stronger now than ever." Meanwhile, Victoria faced the full force of justice. As the investigation unfolded, more of her crimes were brought to light. Fraud, embezzlement, and even her role in Jonathan Howard's untimely death led to a lengthy prison sentence. Alone in her cell, Victoria was left to reflect on the ruins of her once grand life. The very brooch she had treasured became a key piece of evidence against her, a haunting symbol of the life she had destroyed. For Ethan, the closure brought by Victoria's downfall allowed him to fully embrace his new life. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined him. He poured his energy into the foundation, ensuring that every program reflected his and Olivia's shared vision of compassion and opportunity. One day, during a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new shelter, a young boy approached Ethan shyly. "Mr. Ethan," he said, clutching a worn notebook, "I want to thank you. Because of you, I'm going to school now. I want to be like you when I grow up." Ethan knelt down, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "You're already braver than I ever was," he replied with a smile. "And I believe you'll do amazing things." Moments like this became a source of strength for Ethan and Olivia, reaffirming their commitment to their mission. Their work wasn't about erasing the pain of the past, but transforming it into a force for good. Years later, the foundation expanded nationwide, becoming a model for charitable organizations around the world. Ethan and Olivia were frequently invited to speak at conferences, sharing their story of resilience and hope. But despite their growing fame, they remained humble, dedicating their lives to the causes they cared about most. On the eve of their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan and Olivia sat on the porch of their modest countryside home, overlooking a sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their laughter echoed softly, mingling with the chirping of crickets. "I never thought I'd have this," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude as he gazed at Olivia. "A family, a purpose, you," Olivia smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "And I never thought a single act of kindness could change my life so completely. But here we are." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Olivia knew their story wasn't just about them. It was about the countless lives they had touched and the hope they had reignited. From the ashes of a dark past, they had built a future filled with light, proving that even the greatest pain can lead to extraordinary redemption. The city, once defined by its detached elite and towering social hierarchies, underwent a remarkable transformation. Thanks to Ethan and Olivia's unwavering efforts, it became renowned for its compassion, inclusion, and innovative social progress. Streets that once echoed with indifference now bustled with initiatives to uplift the underprivileged. The name Ethan Howard became synonymous with resilience, his journey from despair to purpose, inspiring a generation. Ethan frequently toured schools and universities, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. "No matter how dark it seems, there's always a way forward," he would say, his powerful story igniting hope in students and faculty alike. His message was clear: obstacles are temporary, and the smallest spark of kindness can light the path to a brighter future. Crowds hung on his every word, the lost boy of Fifth Avenue becoming a symbol of what can be achieved when resilience meets opportunity. Olivia, meanwhile, leveraged her influential connections in high society, tirelessly advocating for causes that were once ignored by the upper class. At charity galas, she spoke with conviction, her passion moving even the most skeptical attendees to open their hearts and their wallets. What once seemed impossible, bridging the gap between wealth and social responsibility, became a tangible reality through her efforts. Together, she and Ethan reshaped the priorities of the city's elite, proving that real power lies in lifting others. Their story became a beacon of hope, a vivid reminder that the value of a person is measured not by their social status or wealth, but by their ability to extend a helping hand. The tale of Ethan and Olivia served as proof that kindness can pierce even the deepest darkness and create ripples of change that echo far beyond the initial act. As the years rolled on, Ethan and Olivia often reflected on their extraordinary journey with wonder and gratitude. What had started as a simple act of compassion on a crowded New York street blossomed into a movement that changed lives. Each small step, every meal shared, every hand reached out, contributed to a larger story of transformation. Their work continued tirelessly, fueled by their determination to build a world where no one felt invisible or forgotten. They knew the battle against inequality was far from over, but their story was a testament to the idea that progress is made one act of kindness at a time. Ethan and Olivia had discovered that true love and compassion have the power to not only heal individuals, but also unite communities and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. As this chapter closes, the echoes of their impact remain as vibrant as ever. If this story moved you, we encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to bring you uplifting and inspiring tales like this one every day. Don't forget to stay tuned. Another surprising story is just a click away. Explore the links appearing on your screen now for a specially curated selection of content filled with heart, meaning, and guaranteed entertainment. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. See you soon.